Got a question for you. How long should the honeymoon phase of a marriage last? Forever. Okay. How long should the honeymoon phase of a marriage last? Well, funny, I have a story on that. My honeymoon was an awesome honeymoon. I had an incredible honeymoon. It was right in between college graduation and my first job, so I kind of had several months. So we did a 5-week honeymoon in Europe. We went to Greece, Italy, Switzerland, France, Spain. It was incredible. And I know it sounds like, man, you must be some filthy millionaire. We did this thing on a shoestring. I booked like 2-star hotels and hostels with shared rooms. I learned through that experience, shared bathrooms anyway, I learned through that experience that is not how my wife likes to vacation. But man, we made those dollars last. And so this was our vacation, 5 weeks trouncing around, wonderful time, got into Rome. I was so excited to get to Rome to see the Colosseum, but I never saw the Colosseum. We were flying into Rome from Athens. My fever started to spike, and it got higher and higher, dangerously higher, until my wife said, I don't want a dead husband on my honeymoon. She probably didn't say it that way. That's so morbid to talk in this context. Anyway, she said, we've got to take care of this. She gets me on some taxi, and we go to the Rome American Hospital, which was convenient because I was an American in Rome. And we get there, and we meet with Dr. Valducci. And Dr. Valducci diagnoses me emergency appendectomy. I got my appendix taken out. I was in Rome in the hospital for 3 days. Dr. V meets with us afterward, and he gives me strict orders. And he says, do not carry any luggage the rest of your trip. You don't have to tell me twice. Fast forward, train stops in Venice, hot, sweaty, balmy summer Venice. And we're getting off the train, and I have my Kindle book. He didn't say anything about no Kindle books, and I'm just reading along in my Kindle, kind of walking, and Alicia steps off the train. She's got a backpack on her back, 5 weeks of supplies. She has a backpack on her stomach, my 5 weeks of supplies, and she has 2 suitcases, and she's walking like this. Now, at first I start walking beside her because that's polite, but then I start to feel self-conscious because people are literally staring at me like I'm the biggest chauvinist pig in the world. So I just start like walking more slowly, reading the Kindle book, nothing to see here. Every now and then my wife turns around and I see her just kind of huff. And then she just kind of keeps going like, this is not pretty. We get to the water station. There's 2 options, water bus, water taxi. One's convenient and expensive. One's cheap and inconvenient. I choose that. More huffing. So we finally arrive at kind of pretty much our destination. We get off the vessel with a crowd of people scurrying to their locations. And I can see our hotel in the distance. It's just a little walk. I'm excited. Alicia's most excited, but I'm excited. And a teenage boy runs up to us, and he says, do you want help carrying your luggage for a fee? And I look at Alicia like, she's doing pretty good. No, we're all right, man. We got to make this money last. We got like 3 more weeks. Actually, that wasn't the reason I said no. The real reason I said no is because I was a terrible husband. But now I have changed. I have repented of my ways. I actually did say no. I really did say no. And it was terrible. I'm embarrassed to tell you. That was terrible. I mean, terrible. But she stayed married to me. Praise God. That was a hard day. And I'll spare you some of the details. But out of 3 days in Paris, 1 of them was spent alone. Alicia said she needed space. All that to say, my honeymoon phases ended before my honeymoon was actually over. So, how long does a honeymoon phase last? It depends on who you're asking. Okay, so we're in a series called Head Over Heels. We're talking about love. We're talking about romance. And As you can see, for the last few weeks, we've been in this series. It's a study. The series is a study in a book of the Bible called the Song of Songs, which is dedicated to this very subject. And we've been just walking through chapter by chapter. We've looked at the magic of love and how the world has such a jaded view of what love is and can be, but God really has a magical view of love and how to attain that. Last week, we looked at love's new light. That is the light of new possibilities if we nurture love in accordance with its nature. This week, our subject is lovesick. Lovesick. And that is, how can I be sick for my partner instead of being sick of my partner? There's going to be a little conflict res talk today. But lovesick, that's the subject. And then next week, we will talk about love making. And that's not just because this is a gimmick to get you all back in church next week. That's actually what the next chapter in the Song of Songs is about. And we will look at it from not the world's perspective, but we will look at it from God's perspective as something that is beautiful and sacred and why that is so. And so that will be next week. So hope you'll come back for that. With that said, we will be in two different chapters today. Song of Songs, some of your Bibles will call it the Song of Solomon, same book. The Song of Songs, chapters 3 and chapter 5. Song of Songs, chapter 3 and chapter 5. And what's been happening throughout this song so far is that a king named Solomon, wealthy, powerful king in Israel, the most powerful king Israel ever had, falls in love with a peasant girl. I've been calling her the Hebrew Cinderella. And Solomon and his Hebrew Cinderella, who goes by Shulamith, have fallen head over heels. And for 2 chapters, we've been watching them with that sparkle in their eye and that bounce in their step and that intoxication of young love. And as we get to chapter 3, the end of chapter 3 is their wedding day. Chapter 4 is their wedding night. The beginning of chapter 3 is Shulamith, this Hebrew Cinderella, just before her wedding, probably the night before her wedding, and she's so lovesick. She's so thinking about marrying my king, she can't go to sleep. Imagine that. And so that's where we pick it up in Song of Songs, chapter 3. We'll read the first 5 verses. It says, "On my bed by night, I sought him whom my soul loves. I sought him, but found him not. I will rise now and go about in the city, in the streets and in the squares. I will seek him whom my soul loves." And so she's in bed. She's so lovesick, she actually gets out of bed and decides she's going to go searching like a mad woman who's escaped the loony bin for the one her soul loves. She's wandering around. She says, "I sought him, but found him not. The watchman found me." In ancient times, they had watchmen who would stand guard on the walls and in towers to make sure there were no enemy invaders. They're looking for enemy invaders, but all they see is a crazy woman wandering around the streets looking for her lover. "Have you seen him whom my soul loves? Scarcely had I passed them when I found him whom my soul loves." A little repetition here, isn't there? It's communicating just how lovesick she is. And the only cure for lovesickness is the one whom your soul loves. So she chases around, seeks throughout the city, in the darkness of night. The watchmen find her, thinks she's crazy, but finally she finds him. It says, "I held him and would not let him go until I brought him into my mother's house and into the chamber of her who conceived me." So this is going back to an old Bible verse you hear preached in weddings, Genesis chapter 2:24, where it says that man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife. And so what this speaks of is that in marriage, that there are two people who are leaving their previous home and being united in a future home as they make a home together. The fact that she brings Solomon back to her mother's house shows we're not quite ready for that. We're not quite there yet. The appointed day isn't here. I'm bringing you back over to my mom's house. And Solomon stays with her. Verse 5, she says, "I adjure you, swear to me." Now, this is a verse we looked at extensively last week. "Swear to me, O daughters of Jerusalem," these would have been her peers, by the gazelles or the does of the field, that you do not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. She's calling upon them to be patient. What's happening here is you can imagine a couple madly in love, so madly in love, so lovesick that apparently Solomon was out searching for her. They're lovesick. They meet each other in the night. They go back to her mom's house, and you can imagine there are some activities to be desired in that moment. Back late at night in a home. Well, she says, be patient. She says, by the does, the gazelles, the field. I don't care if we're madly in love. I don't care if we're engaged to be married. I don't care if our wedding day is tomorrow. There is something precious that we will ruin if we consummate this marriage before its appointed time. Now, I could go a lot more into that. It has to do with what the act of consummating a marriage, what the act of love-making actually communicates. But we'll discuss that next week. But she's saying, be patient. And so you have these starstruck lovers staring into each other's googly eyes all night long and trying to be patient. So verse 6 is the wedding day. Solomon comes in. They get married. Chapter 4, the wedding night. And then we're going to move forward to chapter 5. Why are we doing it this way? The reason we're doing it this way is that chapter 3, the beginning of it, and chapter 5 are matching sections. They're matching sections. And that might sound strange to us because as Western thinkers, everything is linear. You do A, then you do B, then you do C, and it goes like this every single time. But for a Hebrew person, especially a Hebrew person who was illiterate, that would not be the case. They did not think in a linear fashion, but more in a circular fashion. So they would revisit themes that appeared before, because if you're illiterate and you're just listening, you start to make mental connections and comparisons and contrasts, and that's what's happening here. What you're going to see is you're going to see several themes reappear in chapter 5 in this matching section. You're going to see themes of, once again, she's in bed. Once again, late at night. Once again, there's the theme of seeking and finding. Once again, there's the theme of lovesickness. Once again, the daughters of Jerusalem appear. Once again, the watchmen, these random watchmen, appear again. And so you're going to see lots of repetition, but you're also going to see some differences. And it's those differences that the author of this love song, King Solomon himself, is trying to get us to key in on so that we can learn about love, what he wants us to learn about love and lovesickness. So we're going to pick it up in chapter 5, verse 2, which begins the next section, the matching section. They've been lovesick, they've been patient, they've gotten married, now they're married. Let's pick it up in chapter 5, verse 2. She says, I slept, but my heart was awake. A sound, my beloved, is knocking. So first she pursued him in the night, but now he's pursuing her. Open to me, my sister, my love, my dove, my perfect one. 4 terms of endearment. For my head is wet with dew, my locks with the drops of the night. It seems he's been away on business travel. He's traveled in darkness. He's traveled in rain to surprise his lover. I'm back early, surprise. She has a lukewarm response. Verse 3, I put off my garment. How can I put it on? I bathed my feet. How could I soil them? In other words, I've taken off my makeup. I've washed my face. I've gotten ready for bed, and now you want me to get up and be romantic with you? Verse 4. Apparently he's been knocking for a while. Maybe it's growing on her. My beloved put his hand to the latch. My heart was thrilled within me. I arose to open to my beloved, and my hands dripped with myrrh, my fingers with liquid myrrh, a perfume, on the handles of the bolt. I opened to my beloved, but my beloved had turned and gone. Apparently he knocked, and 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 he called until he was embarrassed to keep knocking and to keep calling. And finally, he went away. It says, my soul failed me when he spoke. I sought him, but found him not. I called him, but he gave no answer. The watchmen, remember them? They found me as they went about the city. They beat me. They bruised me. They took away my veil, those watchmen of the walls. I adjure you, swear to me, O daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my beloved, tell them, if you find my beloved, tell him I am sick with love. So let's stop there. What in the world is happening here? What's happening is, in chapter 3, she's so sick with love, she'll go like a crazy person through the town. She can stop at nothing to find him. But in chapter 5, they've had a little time to get to know each other. They've had a little time to be in love and to be married. They've spent lots of time together. And now in chapter 5, when he's come from a long distance, when he knocks on the door, she's not even motivated enough to get out of bed and answer it until it's too late. Solomon in this song is making a point, and the point is this. At first, love chooses us, but later, we must choose love. At first, love chooses us, but later, we must choose love. At first, love chooses us. There's the bounce in the step, the sparkle in the eye, the gleam in the smile. First, it's just we fall in love. Cupid's arrow strikes us. We're helplessly in love. We're so lovesick, we'll do anything for our lover. It's like that song by Garth Brooks, and Bob Dylan, and now Adele. It was my wedding song to make you feel my love. I go hungry, I go black and blue. I'd go crawling down the avenue. There ain't anything I wouldn't do to make you feel my love. And so in the beginning, that's the way it was. Love sickness. Love just chose them and took them over. They were overcome with emotion. But later, it's not quite that way. And here's a message for us. Even in ideal love, apathy sets in. I don't care if you're Solomon and Shulamith. I don't care if you are Romeo and Juliet. Even in ideal love, apathy sets in. At first, love chooses you, but then things start to settle, and you must choose love. But I have good news. And the good news is, if you choose love, love will once again choose you. Put differently, in the beginning, your emotion drives your devotion. Later, devotion will rekindle emotion. And so they feed upon each other. And that's what we see happens for Shulamith. What happens for her is the love sickness has gone away. It's been replaced by apathy. But ultimately, she does respond. Ultimately, she does go out into the town finding her lover. The beating that takes place from the watchman, you got to remember, this is song, this is metaphor. This is talking about the beating that her heart has taken. And that's the truth. If we let apathy set in, the fire, the flame of love starts to cool and cool and cool, and the darkness of our night becomes darker, and the pain in our heart becomes greater. That's what Shulamith experiences, but to her credit, she does ultimately respond. And so once we respond with devotion, emotion rekindles. Once we choose love, love once again chooses us. Love sickness, that honeymoon phase, in a sense, does have a shelf life. The euphoric feelings do go away. Experts say 6 months to 3 years. If you're one of the lucky 3-year folks, maybe as long as halfway through your honeymoon, if you're me. They do go away. That euphoric feeling does not last forever. It does ebb and flow. However, when it ebbs, if you devote yourself to love, it will be rekindled again. So there's a famous marriage counselor, therapist, Gary Chapman, wrote a book called The 5 Love Languages. Anybody ever heard of The 5 Love Languages? Become like international bestseller, really famous. He's probably been on Oprah. I don't know because I don't watch Oprah. But anyway, very famous guy, Gary Chapman. In his book on the 5 love languages, he tells the story about a couple named Brent and Becky. And Becky comes into his office to receive some counseling, and she's clearly heartbroken. She's clearly devastated. Her husband, Brent, has told her, I don't love you anymore. And she tells the story, and they've been euphorically in love, madly in love, couldn't get enough of each other, got married, some times passed, and then it just seemed like one day everything went cold, and he went cold toward her. And so she's devastated by this. He wants a divorce. And so Gary Chapman is able to convince her to get your husband back in, and he's dragged into the office. He does not want to be there, but he comes out of obligation, and they begin to dialogue and come to find out Brent has found another woman. And with this other woman, he has convinced himself, I can't live without her. He says, yes, I was madly in love with Becky, but the reason that didn't work is because it wasn't the real thing. Because if it was the real thing, euphoric feelings would last forever and ever unabated. That's what he thought, and that's what many people think. And so when the feelings went away, he found another woman with whom he had feelings. And so Gary Chapman begins to explain. He says, listen, and I'm going to use my paraphrase in my language. He essentially said this: at first, love chooses you, but later you must choose love. At first, emotion drives your devotion, but later, devotion rekindles your emotion. If you come back to Becky and devote yourself to loving her, you will find your heart and your love rekindling for her. I've seen it happen many times, and he tries to convince him, but Brent is stone-faced. Brent will not be convinced. He will not show compassion. He will not show remorse. He's just stone-faced. And so he leaves, and he continues with his relationship, and they continue, and they separate their ways, but they haven't gotten a divorce yet. They're just separated, and he's with this other woman. Fast forward. Some number of weeks, and I can't remember the exact period of time, Brent comes back in. Comes back into Dr. Chapman's office. And he's not quite so calm or confident or self-assured or any of these things. He's broken. And Chapman asks, okay, what's going on? And he says, well, the new girl and I are starting to have problems, and she started to be really critical of me. In fact, sharply critical, far more critical than Becky ever was toward me. And now it doesn't even look like our relationship is going to make it. What do I do? And Gary Chapman goes back into same sermon, part 2. At first, love chooses you, but then you must choose love, etc., etc. But this time, he's ready to hear the sermon. And he repents. And he goes back to Becky, and he repents before her. And he devotes himself to loving her, and vice versa. And she forgives him, and they reconcile, and they work on their marriage. And according to Gary Chapman, about a year later, they are once again happily in love. At first we choose love, at first love chooses us, but later we must choose love. The emotion later actually follows the devotion. So I want to ask you a question. Those of you especially who are married, how are you doing in the apathy department? How are you doing in the area of feeling affection for your lover? Now, I recognize that love is not just a feeling, but I hear sometimes people say love is not a feeling, it's a choice. I disagree with that. I believe love is a feeling and a choice. Because, I don't know, if I say that I love my wife, but I have zero affection for her in my heart, I'm just a robot who is willing to serve her. That is not love. Okay? Love is both. The feelings do ebb and flow, but they really cooperate together, emotion, devotion, in a beautiful rhythm. Okay? So how are you doing in this rhythm? Are you choosing love? Are you in a place where you need to choose love? Are you in a place where the affections are very strong? Or are you in a place where you would like to get back to there? So what I want to do now is I want to get real practical. Because choosing love and devoting to your partner is not really that practical. I want to give you 3 things that you can do to devote to love, to reawaken love sickness in your heart. Why 3 things? Because we don't have enough time for 5. So, number 1, here's the first thing that you can do to reawaken that sense of love sickness in your heart. Okay? Number 1 is this. Let love inconvenience you. Let love inconvenience you. This is what love does, according to Bob Dylan, Garth Brooks, and Adele. It inconveniences you. You remember Shulamith in the early days? She didn't even it was no thing for her to wander around to search in the middle of the night. Okay, that was no thing. She inconvenienced herself. For Solomon later, my head is wet with the dew of night. I mean, he don't mind. He's madly in love. Love inconveniences us. Now, in the beginning stages, we have so much emotion driving it, it's easy to do inconvenient things. But in the later stages, when we've taken off our makeup and washed our face, or when whatever it is, when we're comfortable in marriage, it's harder. And so, how are you doing at inconveniencing yourself for love? Moment of accountability for those who've been part of this series for the last couple of weeks. In week 1, I challenged us to do a love journal where we trade love notes between our partner, 1 a week for 4 straight weeks. How are we doing on that? Pastoral confession. I started out awesome, but I went to Cuba last week and they were low on pens and paper. No, actually, this is actually a living illustration of how hard it is in the flow of life, in the busyness of life. You got business travel, you got things going on, you got all this. Well, I let the busyness of ministering all day and all of this get in the way of me actually doing that. Writing a little love note. The things take time, right? Love takes time. It's inconvenient, but here is the good news. Love sickness leads us to inconvenience, but inconvenience leads us back into love sickness. Inconvenience leads us back into love sickness. It's not until Shulamith ultimately does get out of bed, ultimately does chase throughout the city, that once again, by verse 8, she's saying, I'm sick with love. Do you see this repeated theme that devotion really does ultimately lead to emotion? So, have you inconvenienced yourself for love? Married partners, that might be a good discussion for you to have later. How are we doing at inconveniencing ourselves for love? Number two is call on friends for help. Call on friends for help. This is what we see in verse 8 when she says to the daughters of Jerusalem. She's saying, hey, me and my husband, we've got a separation. I can't find him. He's gone. I don't know where he is. There's space between us. I need this resolved. And so she calls on them in verse 8 to help her resolve the space that she's experiencing. I've been a pastor for 15 years. And what I have noticed is that marriages don't make it in isolation. Marriages don't make it in isolation. We need to call on the help of friends. We have no problem making our vows in the presence of community, but then we go from there as though we don't need any help keeping our vows from the community. No, we make our vows in the presence of community, and the only way we'll keep them is with the help of community. That is what she is modeling here. I still remember in the early days of my marriage, in year 2 of my marriage, and Alicia and I went through a really hard time. And I can tell you just the honest truth, as a pastor, it's tempting sometimes. I would like to make myself look really good before you, okay? I really would. I would like for you guys to think Michael is the most wonderful and incredible pastor and probably husband to his wife and father to his children and all of these things. Well, it's tempting for me to say to Alicia, okay, hey, for the deep struggles that we have, just let's keep that between ourselves. But you know what? I made a decision early in my marriage. I wasn't going to do that. And I said, hey, Alicia, it's actually important for you to get one or two, a few close friends. In the church, out of the church, I don't care, okay? Because I would rather let myself be embarrassed over somebody else knowing the unflattering thing I said or did. I would rather have that than have the flame of my love flicker out. And so I gave her permission to do that. Have you given your spouse permission to do that? And do you have somebody in your life that you can share those things with? And while I'm on this point, I actually want to pause here for a moment, because I guarantee, somebody in this room where your spouse has told you, this area of our marriage, this harmful thing that I've said or done, you're not allowed to tell anybody. They've used anger, they've used control, they've used threat to make you say a vow of silence. And I just want you to know, as your pastor, that is abuse. Abuse always silences the victim. And I also want to say this as your pastor, or even if you're visiting as a pastor in this room, I hereby break that vow of silence. And here's why I say that. It's going to destroy you if you keep that thing inside. And my heart breaks to think of that happening to you. It's too much for you to bear. We have to have friends that we can call on for help. And if you are in a situation where through anger and force and coercion, you are forced to make an agreement that you really don't prefer to make, that's not a true, valid agreement. Even legally, they call that extortion. Okay? And so I would just say, please tell one person, tell a pastor in this church, we want to help you. Call on friends for help. Every marriage needs it. Last one is respond to hurt with tender love. Respond to hurt with tender love. Here's why I say this. So Solomon comes in. He's traveled through the night and through the rain. He's ready to surprise his bride. He's knocking on the door. He's calling her name. And she don't want to get out of bed? Like, how would you feel in such a scenario? I don't care if you are the male or the female. If you were going through great inconvenience to yourself to be romantic, to be close to spend time with the one that you love, and that person, after time away, isn't even willing to lift a finger to do so, it's going to hurt your feelings, wouldn't you say? It's not very hard to imagine Solomon in that moment. I mean, if I'm Solomon, I'm probably like, Shulamith, okay, I take back perfect one. All right, I'm taking away my dove too. Like we're going, we're just taking off these terms of endearment. I'm knocking louder. Or I could also imagine this response. Instead of making demands and being angry and raging, I could also imagine, okay, I'm just going to walk away and stay away. You gave me the cold shoulder. I'm going to give you the cold shoulder, tit for tat. Apathy for apathy. Isn't that the way lots of marriages go? And a divide that starts this big gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But Solomon doesn't do any of those things. Do you remember in verse 5 where it says that the woman, when she finally does get up, she puts her fingers on the bolt of the door and on the doorknob, and she feels liquid myrrh on her fingers? What's going on there? The best way to understand this is that this is Solomon. Rather than returning apathy for apathy, rather than banging down the door and making demands and raging, this was an ancient version of a love note. This was Solomon's way of saying, okay, you're not going to answer the door for now. Fine, that's cool. I get it. You're tired. So I'm just going to leave you a little love note. And he just leaves a little mark that he was there. Perfume. I'm tenderly still in love with you. Even if you hurt me, I still tenderly love you. Isn't that beautiful? How different you think our marriages would be if that's the way we responded when our partner hurt us? I'm not saying there's not a time and a place for sharing how we've been hurt and working through it, but how different would our marriages be if our first response was tenderness instead of anger or indifference? There's a famous marriage counselor and therapist, studied thousands of marriages. His name's John Gottman. He says this. I thought it was important. He says, even in stable, happy relationships, when conflict begins with hostility, defensive sequences result. When conflict begins with hostility, even in happy, good marriages, if hostility is the beginning, it will continue in hostility and defensiveness. Respond to hurt with tender love. So let's summarize this and kind of tie it all up. I've said that love, that in the beginning, at first, love chooses us, but later, we choose love. When we choose love, love will once again choose us. I gave you 3 ways in which we can choose love. I said, number 1, let love inconvenience you. Are you doing that? Number 2, call on friends to help. Are you humble enough to do so? Number 3, respond to hurt with tender love. Are you showing hostility or tenderness towards your spouse? I'm not guaranteeing that if you do these things, you will have a perpetual, uninterrupted, unabated love sickness for the rest of your life. But what I am saying is that if you consistently do these things, you will consistently return to that place of feeling deep affection for your partner. So I began with a story about a honeymoon phase cut short tragically early. I thought I'd finish with a story that's actually like the complete reverse. It's a honeymoon phase that started later. And it takes place in a culture in India where they do arranged marriages. Now here in the West, we frown upon arranged marriages and we say, oh, that's not real love, that's not romantic love, and so on. It's actually interesting if you study arranged marriages that after 5 years, they surpass non-arranged marriages in terms of the affection that partners show for one another. And in 10 years, they double. So we should have all had arranged marriages. I'm joking. But they understand something from the very outset that when love comes alive in your heart, just because it's the real thing, doesn't mean it's automatic to last forever. They devote themselves to love and they experience that. And so this story involves a couple named Fatima and Arjun, and their marriage was arranged. And she grew up in India. Now India is being more and more influenced by the West, and you've got Hollywood, but now you've got Bollywood, and they've got all these, they've got all these movies of romantic love and all of this. And so she says she grew up, Fatima did, and just dreaming, knowing that she's probably going to have an arranged marriage, but dreaming of this romantic Bollywood type of marriage and wedding experience. And so when the day actually did come, her parents paired her up with somebody that she barely knew at all, which was pretty common. He was 10 years older. And her mom had told her, you'll have to grow to love this person. And so she says, I waited weeks and then months, and then time just kept going by and by and by. I waited to grow more in love with this person, but the only thing that grew was my disappointment. And that began to grow, and it began to snowball until the point where she couldn't hold it in anymore. And so one day, her husband, Arjun, came home, and she poured it all out. She poured out her words, she poured out her tears, she poured out her emotions, and she poured out everything that she felt, that this wasn't just not love at first sight. She says this wasn't love at all. This is a loveless and a romanceless marriage. She's disappointed. She's frustrated. She says her husband sat and he listened to everything and he asked her to be patient. And she says, the next morning I woke up and there was a note by the bed. And the note said something to this effect. It said, Dear Fatima, I'm sorry that I've not been the romantic husband that you've dreamed about. But what do you say we make a start? Let's take some baby steps, and perhaps one day you will experience that destination, we will experience that destination that you call love. She says from there, things started to change, and they started to do small things for each other here and there, and she started to notice, and he started to notice. When I read this article, it was 3 years into their marriage. She described themselves as happily married and eager to live out this vow of till death do us part. Now, I tell you that story because I hope that it gives you hope, that in the most loveless, emotionless of marriages, God can redeem anything. And that in the midst of no matter what your marriage situation is, God has given us the tools and the wisdom that if we apply them, He can rekindle that flame that might just be smoldering right now. He can do it. So I hope on one hand that this gives you hope. But I also just want to address, as we close, a group of people who are maybe listening to everything that I'm saying, and you're saying, Michael, I've applied those tools. I've done those things, or at least I've tried. But when I look at my marriage, when I look at my relationship now, it feels so broken. It feels so hurt. I don't even have the strength to pick up a tool. Tools are great if you have the strength to use them. And that's where Jesus comes in. And that's what this story, the Song of Songs, is really about. Yes, it's about love and romance, but it's about the bigger love story of Jesus for his people. 2,000 years ago, Jesus looked down from heaven and he saw us on our bed of apathy toward him, but it didn't change the way he felt in his heart. He inconvenienced himself, to say the least. The deity, the supreme being, became a human being, wrapped himself in human flesh, came and lived and suffered. And on the way to the cross, he called his closest friends together. He says, I'm too weak. The flesh is too weak. I can't make it through. Come pray with me. I can't make it through without prayer. Come pray with me, support me. But his friends like Shulamith fell asleep. And so he prayed, and he faced the hostility of the cross by himself. The Bible says that he gave up his spirit. He breathed his last, but not without leaving behind a love note. Not perfume, but his precious blood. And every love note says something. What did Jesus' love note say? It said, no matter how much of a mess you've made of your life, no matter how broken you feel, no matter how broken your marriage is, no matter how messed up things are, no matter how apathetic you are, no matter how much you've hurt me or other people, no matter how much you've sinned, I still feel just as tender towards you now as I ever did, so much so that I gave my life for you. And today my love for you is just as alive as I am. If you want to talk about the power to use those tools, if you want to talk about the power to resurrect love, it rests not in our strength, not in our discipline to make a choice, but in the power of him who raised Jesus from the dead. Let's pray.